ADF panel titled Food Security, a Rising Challenge. My name is Elif Bereketli. I'm a journalist and presenter with TRT World, and I will be moderating this panel. So we will be talking about food security here, the rapid expansion of the world global population combined with the effects of global warming, the COVID-19 pandemic, of course the ongoing conflicts all around the world, economic turbulence. These are the perfect recipe for a disaster at hand. But how do we combat these challenges on food security? How can diplomacy play a role? And what challenges do humanitarian organizations face? What do they need to help? Now, we will talk about all these important and tough questions indeed, but here we have a strong panel. I'm joined by, on my left is Mihai Popsoy, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs, Moldova. Welcome, sir. Nancy Tembo, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Malawi, sitting next to Mihai Popsoy on my left. Welcome. Omar Aliou Touré, President of the Commission Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS. Kate Forbes, President, International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, the International Federation of Red Cross, welcome. And Karl Skau, Deputy Executive Director and Chief Operating Officer at World Food Programme, welcome. So, they will all be bringing their insight into this conversation, and it will be a truly global panel, as I see. We really appreciate that. Before we start, just a quick reminder that this is a 60-minute conversation. And if time permits, we would be very willing to get questions from the floor as well. So whilst you're listening to us, please think about what could be asked and what would be an important message to raise here. Please join the conversation and share your thoughts with us. Without further ado, I would like to start with you, sir, Mihai Popsoy. Of course, the war in Ukraine. It has affected the food security pretty much all around the world. But I want to hear about your country-specific experience. What is the situation in Moldova in terms of food security, and are there any lessons to be learned from what's happening in Ukraine?
Thank you, Elif. Indeed, just past week, we've had the tragic commemoration of the 2-year anniversary of the full-scale Russian aggression against Ukraine. And the Republic of Moldova, throughout these 2 years, but also from the beginning, from the 2014 annexation of Crimea, has been steadfast in its support of the territorial integrity of Ukraine. We have welcomed in the last 2 years more than 1.4 million refugees in the Republic of Moldova, in a country of 2.5 million. We have processed, and now we have over 115,000 refugees in Moldova, mainly women and children. We're providing the best care we can, together with our friends and partners in the international community, and we'll continue to do so. When it comes to food security, of course, the Republic of Moldova is a major transit hub for the grain from Ukraine. And in this case, I would like to commend the efforts of Turkey when it comes to the grain initiative, trying to contribute to a safe passage of Ukrainian grain, which is the breadbasket of Europe. And there is desperate need of this commodity in many places in the world. And when the grain deal was suspended and Russia denied access to countries that wanted to import grain, we provided our infrastructure, and together with the EU, we established those solidarity lanes in the Republic of Moldova, corridors for exporting Ukrainian grain, importing goods to Ukraine. Through Moldova, we processed almost 2 million tons of goods to and from Ukraine, primarily grain, for the international market, so that citizens that need those resources are not left without them. We'll continue to provide access to our infrastructure to Ukraine and the countries that need that grain. We are investing our infrastructure to make sure that we continue to provide the best avenues for exports in the largest capacity possible. And we are preparing ourselves to not only continue to provide this solidarity lanes, but also when time comes to be that hub, the logistics hub for the reconstruction of Ukraine. So we are counting on our friends and partners in the international community to help us in this regard, not only with refugees, but also to maintain the stability and security in the region, also in the Transnistrian region of the Republic of Moldova, so that we can be, in turn, the actor that provides support to Ukraine, first and foremost when it comes to food security, but also in other important areas like support for refugees and other assistance to our friends and partners in Ukraine.
Now that you mentioned it, I would like to ask you about the role of UN agencies and, of course, the international NGOs. What should they be doing in assisting food resiliency around the world and, of course, in Moldova?
Indeed, and in the first weeks of the war, I must admit, it was somewhat shocking for us the way we managed to address that enormous crisis, because our capacities are modest, but at the same time, with the support of the international community, UN organizations and other international organizations that came to the rescue, but also our citizens, the society was mobilized. Citizens came to the rescue of their Ukrainian friends and neighbors, and the whole society pulled their resources together. Most Moldovans welcomed Ukrainian refugees in their homes, so that the state had less resources were needed from the state, given that a big chunk of the refugees were welcomed in the homes of Moldovan citizens. So despite the enormous pressure, given the fact that Moldovan citizens have been so welcoming and so open to Ukrainian refugees, having lived through our own struggles in the early 90s, actually today is the sad anniversary of 32 years since the beginning of the conflict in the Transnistrian region of the Republic of Moldova. So we know there's a struggle and the suffering. That's why we open our hearts and homes to our Ukrainian neighbors. And together with the international community, we managed to pool resources to provide the best assistance, to provide healthcare, to provide education, to provide jobs to the extent that we can in our economy. And we remain steadfast in our commitment to do that for our Ukrainian friends and neighbors. And thanks to the support of the international community, we'll continue to do that.
Thanks a lot for your remarks. Now, as I said, the ongoing war in Ukraine has had a huge impact on food security all around the world, not only in the immediate surrounding countries. And one of them is actually Malawi. However surprising it might sound, Malawi is affected by the war in Ukraine when it comes to food security, but also, of course, the climate crisis. I mean, climate crisis and food security is hugely interlinked, and Malawi had a destructive cyclone Freddy, just over a year ago, and they haven't fully recovered from it. Now, climate change, how does it affect food security? Nancy Tembo, could you please elaborate on that?
Thank you, moderator, for the opportunity, and it's an honor to be here, to be part of this conversation. Indeed, I come from Malawi. Malawi is mostly an agricultural country. Most of our farmers are subsistence farmers, dependent on rain-fed agriculture. And the issue of climate change has become now the most formidable challenge impacting on the very development of our country, because we derive our economic activities, 80% of the livelihoods from the value chain, agricultural value chains. And so since 2015, we've had very erratic weather patterns that are really unusual in the way they impact on the country. For instance, you expect in Malawi that in November you have your rainfall, you plant your crops, and that come April you're harvesting. But we've had situations where rainfall has not come till January. So it's like a distortion. And we've had cyclones since 2015. Cyclones that have impacted negatively in Malawi, in Mozambique, in Madagascar, parts of Zimbabwe. And we just had the most devastating cyclone just last year, Cyclone Freddy, killed over 1,000 people, destroyed 700,000 households, and most of those families had their crops washed away. So what we are looking at year in, year out, since 2019 we had Cyclone Ida, and then we had Cyclone Anna, we've had Cyclone Gombe, we've had Cyclone Kenneth, we just had Cyclone Freddy. All these cyclones have devastated our country. They have destroyed infrastructure. They have destroyed irrigation infrastructure, destroying livelihoods. And so the impact to food security is so damaging to the very development of our country. It is really taking us back because there's damaged infrastructure, the government purse is so small, now we have to rebuild, but also provide relief to families that have lost their food, their crops. So it is damaging, and what we see is that as we move towards 2030, if we cannot address this issue, the impacts of climate change, it impacts on all the SDGs. And so if you have cyclones, like we had destruction to our education infrastructure, destruction to our hospitals. Because of Cyclone Freddy, we had a cholera outbreak last year. So all these have a negative impact. You have an unhealthy nation, you have a sizable number of citizens not be able to access education because their school blocks have been destroyed by cyclones. So it is, apart from the food insecurity that it brings, it just cuts across all the SDGs, and a country like Malawi, which is already vulnerable, which is already burdened, cannot cope. We have people coming in to help us, but the challenge is so formidable that it is affecting our very development activities.
And how has the government's response been in combating the Cyclone Freddy and the aftermath of it?
Well, what we're doing now, in the past, the emphasis is on rain-fed agriculture, like I've said. We've put up strategies to ensure that, one, in the short term, relief of humanitarian aid from international organizations, helping families, distribution of corn or maize to help mitigate against the food insecurity. But we are encouraging farmers to embark on irrigation, simple irrigation, other than to depend on rain-fed agriculture, teaching farmers on how to just develop simple irrigation systems within their communities. But also we are encouraging farmers, those that can, private sector, to grow what we call mega farms. These are big farms, so that because they are private sector, they have access to financing, they are able to grow more, so that at the national level, we are food secure. We may not be food secure at the household level, but we are food secure at the national level. So this is helping, but there's still more that needs to be done, because we need the technical know-how, we need the research in the drought-resistant crops that we can supplement the maize requirements that most of the population use. Use of organic fertilizers that improve yields, that is something that we are, through our extension workers, we are encouraging farmers to use. You talked about the fertilizer issue. Most of our fertilizers comes from Eastern Europe, most especially from Ukraine and Russia. And because of the war, this has had a greater impact on the cost of fertilizers. So most farmers have not had access to fertilizers because of the escalating costs of fertilizers. So whilst we are so far away from Europe, but the war has really had a sizable impact on production back home because we can't afford, most farmers cannot afford the cost of fertilizer.
I think this is a great example of how intertwined the whole system is, and as we always hear, no one is safe until everyone is safe. So you never know how one conflict in one part of the world can affect completely the other side of the world in terms of food security. Now I'd like to move to our next panelist, Omar Aliyev Try from ECOWAS. Now, we speak of food security, and I tried to, explain a little bit in the beginning, but then I think you can talk about the reasons behind how food insecurity emerges, and so that we understand before we move on to the international organizations and NGOs representatives, we understand the inner workings and the dynamics behind how food resilience can be sustained.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here this morning, and I bring warm greetings to all of you from the 16 member states of ECOWAS. This is the main regional economic community in our part of West Africa, grouping about 15 member states. Food security, I think we all understand it to mean when there is food security exists when people at all times have physical, social, and economic access to sufficient, safe, nutritious food that meets their dietary needs and food preferences for an active and healthy life. That is our understanding of food security. Availability, access, and durability. This is important. Now, if you look at West Africa, we are about 413 million people. 10% of our population are facing food insecurity. That is about 40 million people in West Africa. If I disaggregate this figure, the countries I can mention with severe or with serious food insecurity include, of course, Niger, with 3.2 million people being food insecure. Nigeria, with 26 million people being food insecure. Burkina Faso, about 3 million people. Mali, 1.3 million. And Sierra Leone, 1.5 million. The question becomes, what are the main drivers of food insecurity? Globally and specifically in West Africa. In West Africa, and I think this is the case for many other regions on the continent, drivers include 4 key elements. The first is insecurity. For us in West Africa, insecurity is a key driver of food insecurity. And insecurity, by insecurity, I mean terrorism, organized crime, illegal maritime activity, internal conflicts. These drivers of insecurity are key challenges and key factors contributing to food insecurity. Then we have structural problems. Problems such as poor infrastructure that makes it extremely hard for goods to move from one place to another place. This is also another contributing factor to food insecurity. And structural problems include international regimes international practices that affect food security in our region. If I give an example of such international practices, we can talk about unfair food subsidies, unfair agriculture subsidies that make it easier for a farmer in Senegal or for people in Senegal to buy dairy products from the Netherlands than from Mali. Because perhaps in the Netherlands, there is sufficient subsidy at the farm level to make it easier for them to export cheaply to some of our countries. Such subsidies take away any competitiveness from farmers. So that's another structural challenge. Then you have the geopolitics. The current crisis that their excellencies have referred to, the war in Ukraine, for example, has affected farm inputs for us. If it is not directly leading to food insecurity, it is indirectly leading to it because fertilizers, which we depend very much on, have become extremely expensive to obtain. Already, even before the crisis, our countries are not using sufficient fertilizer. I mean, the average is extremely low when you look at the global requirement. So the geopolitics is part of it. And then the biggest elephant also in the room is the climate crisis. We do have instances where you have floods in dry areas, and you have drought in areas that are used to water. So these are real problems. So these are the four key factors driving food insecurity in West Africa.
Very valuable points. I'd like to come back to you if time permits, sir. Thank you so much for sharing your point of view. Now, Kate Forbes from IFRC. I would like you to describe the current situation of food security around the globe right now, because when we speak in diplomatic and terms in jargons, it's not really linked to the reality. I mean, how dire is the situation, and are we really on the brink of a devastating food security crisis?
Thank you for the opportunity to appear today. As we sit and we look backwards, we've tried to, in my mind, put Band-Aid solutions on gaping wounds. One only needs to look at the numbers that were just quoted. We were quoting in the millions. We were quoting from acts of war. We were quoting from climate change. So the short answer is we're not on a brink. We are there. And you can't just rely on the humanitarian sector to cure this. We really need political solutions. I think we've talked a bit about Black Sea grain, which really helped agreement with that standpoint. And I think everything that was just mentioned is clearly what we're seeing. We're having to change our approach as an international organization to be much more proactive in adaptation, prevention. And even here in Turkey, if we look after the earthquake, which was pretty innovative for us and one we will continue, is talking about livelihoods to bring back small farmers so we can help sustain food. We can't just come in one-off and leave. We have to look for a long-term solution. And clearly, this is, as you pointed out earlier, very interconnected. And it's going to take efforts both politically and through our organizations to address short-term and long-term. But we're going to have to be much more innovative, much more nimble, and our goal should be not to be responding to food crisis, but how do we act preventatively and help with adaptation? Because we know climate change is here, we know the numbers are staggering. And if we don't do this, if we don't see political solutions to help us, we're going to see more violence. One only needs to look at what happened 2 days ago in Gaza around food distribution. And So as Omar talked about in Africa as well, when there's not enough food, it does not lead to a stable society. So as an NGO, we have a very key role to play on going forward.
If it goes the way it does right now, in say a decade's time or 20 years' time, what could happen? I mean, what would happen if food security is compromised? As you said, we might face violence, but also can you expand on what is possible to see in the future?
Well, I wish we had a decades or 10 years. We don't. The crisis is here today, and we are seeing what's happening. We are seeing the number of people who are dying from hunger. So it's here. So we need to act much bolder. We need to have our politicians realize this is something that they have to address now. And what we will see is massive migration, which caused different problems. It is the most vulnerable, women and children, who will be left behind, quite frankly, are often the ones that die first. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. You know, we have to move, and we have to collectively look at how we find solutions.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Now I want to move on to Carl Scow. What do you think about Kate Forbes' words? Do you also think that we're in the middle of a devastating food security crisis?
Over here. No,
That's good, thank
I
you.
agree with everything basically that has been said. I mean, I want to first just underline how critical the situation is. You pointed to the drivers, climate change, conflict, economic downturn, but I think it's important to point out that in 3 years, the number of acute food insecure has more than doubled. We are over 300 million, and that's only in 3 years. What we saw in 22, though, was that there was also a boost of funding, a boost of resources to try to deal with this increase. But that's come to an end. So we're now back to an overall resource level for that looks like 1920, where we were less than half of the needs that we are now. So I think that's important. We are at unprecedented levels of needs that has grown dramatically in 3 years. And we now have an unprecedented gap between those needs and the resources. And we are still, WFP, the largest UN agency, humanitarian actor, but by no means can we meet these needs out there. On the contrary, we are cutting in Syria, cutting in Yemen, cutting in Afghanistan, so we're really at the bare bone. And the consequences are, of course, first and foremost humanitarian. There is a massive humanitarian impact on women and children, as Kate spoke to, but it's also, frankly, a security issue, stability issue, like my colleague from ECOWAS pointed to. This is going to cause greater instability and uncertainty going forward. I mean, we're trying to face this in maybe 3 areas that I want to point to. The first one is really efficiency. Given the gap we have, what can we bring to the table in terms of getting further on every euro or dollar or whatever currency we manage to mobilize? In this, we are turning every stone to see how we can get further. Innovation is key, but so is to work in new ways, like anticipatory action, for example. So the cyclone, the minister from Malawi was speaking about, when the next one strikes, we have better information in advance to put information into people's hands so that they know what's going to happen, but also resources to be able to take action in advance. We also need to work more with localization, as we call it, strengthen local capacity, put more money into, frankly, closer to where the needs are, rather than spending it on ourselves and our headquarters. So there is a whole kind of reform agenda in order to ensure that we as international organizations are more efficient and effective. The second set of issues is to work more towards solutions. I mean, that has a programmatic side where instead of handing out food, we invest in food systems, in self-reliance, in resilience, in climate adaptation. So that is certainly a direction that we are taking. But there is also a diplomatic angle to this. We need, of course, political solutions to end these conflicts. And short of that, we need political creative solutions to improve access and improve the operating environment for us. And I think the Black Sea Initiative is a great example of there, where there was creative diplomacy coming from Turkey and others to find that win-win opportunity where the actors could come together, which made then a massive impact on food insecurity. And we need similar creative policies now on Gaza, on Sudan, because the current situations are not sustainable. And my final is partnership. We need to work much closer together. These are very interlinked challenges. No one agency or no one stream of work can solve this. We need integrated solutions, so we need to work together as international organizations, but also more closely with governments and national stakeholders in addressing it in a more joined-up approach.
And working together is key, I guess. I mean, how do you do that is the issue here. I think we have a great panel in terms of, we have governments, but we also have international organizations. And as I understand it, they expect things from international organizations, but you, of course, expect help from governments and from the global community in order to be able to help them, right? So can you please talk us through what kind of challenges you face as an international humanitarian organization, and what would you expect governments to do?
I mean, one is funding, certainly. I'm not looking to the governments here mainly for that, but certainly we need governments, traditional donors and new donors to step up and provide the resources. There are a lot of money out there, certainly we can see that with regards to how much is invested in other things, including weapons and armies at the moment. So we would wish governments to step up, of course, to invest more money in this. But then, as I said, also to invest in diplomatic solutions, to end conflict, prevent conflicts from arising, but also find interim solutions for access and more efficient and safe operating environments for us as humanitarians. I mean, on climate, that's really the big issue out there. That's the generational issue we have to face. And so, you know, we would certainly want to see more ambitious climate action, climate mitigation, climate adaptation, and more resources also going into our programs there. I mean, there is specific challenge around what we call, conflict-affected or fragile states or whatever you want to use. You look at a context like Somalia, which has been heavily impacted by climate change. Not $1 out of all these pledged climate money has gone in to provide for better climate adaptation in Somalia. And that's certainly something that needs to change. The same goes for the Sahel, for example, where very little of that money is coming into the Sahel. It's first and foremost resources that should go to local communities and governments, but we are happy to be a facilitator of that. But there needs to be a push from governments to make sure that we reach that paradigm.
You need a push from governments and more investing, and you would like to say something, I guess, Mrs. Forbes, on it.
I would just like to support what Carl said about localization. One of the strengths of our organization is we work at the community basis. And we believe for climate change, especially in the hard-reach areas, that working with local actors gives us the ability to find solutions that are appropriately there. They know solutions better than we do. Yes, funding's part of it. Part of it, though, is coming in and working for sustainable long-term solutions at the local level. And that's clearly what our focus is now, is to get to the local level to find out what they need and help them implement the solution.
Okay, now I'd like to turn to you again, sir. What do you think about the international community's response to what's happening in Ukraine and how it's having an impact on food security?
Well, I must say that in the first year and a half, there was a remarkable unity and remarkable levels of support. As of late, you cannot help but notice that this stream is shrinking. I'd like to commend the European Union for recently providing those 50 billion euros of support. There is the appropriations bill in the House of Representatives in the United States. The Senate has passed it. Now it's up to the House of Representatives to provide a similar package of assistance. That should make a difference. The support that has been provided so far has made a difference. It has made a difference on the front line. It has made a difference on the capacity of Ukraine to export the much needed grain to the international community, the support that we have received to maintain stability in the Republic of Moldova so that we can in turn maintain those solidarity lanes and invest in our infrastructure so that we can be that conduit for the Ukrainian grain and quite frankly also our agricultural products, which in terms of volume are smaller than Ukraine but are important nonetheless in providing helping with food security in other areas of the world. So I can only appeal to the international community to maintain this steadfast support, because without an international rule-based order, we're not going to be talking about food security, because we're not going to have security, which is a foundation, as it was mentioned earlier. It is a foundation for food security. You need to have basic foundational security. So investing in diplomatic solutions, investing in prevention of conflict, investing in robust security architectures so that it's not the rule of the powerful, but it is the rule of the law. Only based on those premises we can hope to have stability. We can only hope to have proper functioning value chains so that we can make sure that the goods, and especially when it comes to food, reaches the countries in need in due time. Moldova in its turn is committed to maintaining its support with our modest resources. We've just provided Ukraine the 11th humanitarian package a few weeks ago, and we'll continue to do our fair share, and we can only count on the rest of the international community to continue to do its fair share.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Now, I would like to ask you, evaluating the way forward, Nancy Tembo, what are your expectations from humanitarian organizations and international community? What could be done better and more?
To continue from where the Deputy Prime Minister, what the world, the Ukraine war has taught Africa is that we have to develop our own food production, make sure we have the capacity to feed ourselves. And to that end, I think most African countries are doing that. An example, in my country, we never used to produce wheat. But this last season, we are producing wheat to produce seed so we can grow wheat to reduce the price of fertilizer. We have to develop our irrigation infrastructure because we can no longer depend on rain-fed agriculture. But for us to be able to do that, we require support from the international community. We need financing to do water harvesting, to build dams, know how to invest in research. We need that financial support and financing for research. We have been at various international fora, and various financing mechanisms have been developed. But at every COP where we discuss issues of climate change, there's been lamentation from least developed countries that the financing mechanisms are so cumbersome. It takes so long to access the financing, and yet we in Africa need these resources like yesterday. Recently, there's been a launch of the Loss and Damage Fund. We hope that this initiative is going to make it simpler for least developed countries to access this financing so that we can develop our own capacities to withstand the negative impacts of climate change. It's not just the developing or building resilience amongst our communities, but to ensure that they understand the relations between climate change, food security, and their very environment. And for this, we need that support. Like I said earlier on, countries such as Malawi are highly indebted countries. What is it that the international community can do? We need perhaps some mitigation. How can they assist us manage the debt burden? Because unless they do that, there's very little left for us to be able to build resilience, to build adaptation, and to do all that is necessary to be able to be food secure and to be able to develop our countries. Now, sometimes you see, yesterday there was talk of migration. The youth of Africa migrate to other continents, not because they want to go. Home is always best. Most of these youth, if they had opportunities at home, they would rather stay at home. So if the developed countries wants to manage its migration, we have to start to build capacity in our countries, ensure that the youth are able to get jobs, be it in agriculture, be it in value addition, be it in infrastructure development. This has to be done in these countries. We need that support. Because if we can do that, then there is no need for our youth to migrate to Europe, because they will be able to earn livelihoods back home. And so what we need, one, is to help in the development of our countries. What has been committed, be it in Paris as part of the Paris Agreement, at the various COP26, COP27, there was commitments made. These developed countries have to adhere to those commitments, support these developed countries, help them to develop. The financing mechanism, the World Bank, has to relook at how it assists developed countries so that what we're talking about here, food security, is achieved at home. Livelihoods are earned back home. If we can develop Africa, we're developing the whole world, because then the world is not burdened with the challenges of Africa. Mm-hmm. Africa will be able to take care of its own challenges.
So I want to pick up on that and maybe give the floor to you one last time before we get questions from the audience.
Thank you very much.
Sure, please go ahead.
Sorry.
Please, I accidentally cut you. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. I fully agree with what the Honourable Minister has said, and what my colleagues from the humanitarian side have also talked about partnership. And I want to take this to all levels. I believe partnership is required not only at the level of humanitarian interventions, but across the board. I have indicated the key drivers of food insecurity in West Africa, for example. And the main driver there is insecurity. How do we partner to fight insecurity? How do we resolve insecurity? For us in ECOWAS, we have observed that in the Sahel alone, an assessment has indicated that there are nothing less than 22 individual initiatives. Each and every partner comes with their own initiative and try to implement it with little contact with the local realities, and disjointed, all of them, sometimes competing. And we feel at ECOWAS, our proposal is, we appreciate each and every intervention, each and every initiative, but we need to create coordination. We need to coordinate these initiatives properly. A better coordination will enable us to enhance ownership, to promote inclusion. Because if you come to our region and take two countries and say you're organizing security partnership with 3 countries, you leave the rest. There is this sense of exclusion. People don't see themselves in those initiatives. If you look at, in recent years, you have, just for security alone, you had Barkhane, you had Takuba, you had the G5 Sahel, you had the MINUSMA, you had Accra Initiative, you have MTJF. All these are initiatives that seek to help secure our region, but they are disjointed. And because there is no coordination, they remain fragmented and their efficiency could be better. So at ECOWAS, we are saying, let us integrate all these initiatives to our own plan of action, our own security plan of action, to ensure that everybody feels related to them, and then we don't need to abandon them. We can use them as specialized tools for the regional plan of action. The Accra Initiative, for example, which is supposed to help countries fight terrorism from spreading from the Sahel or from the north to the coastal areas. We think if this is coordinated from ECOWAS, other countries that are not part of the Accra initiatives will find themselves closely linked to the Accra initiatives. These are the sort of partnerships we think we need to promote. For us, this would build, it would stronger ownership so that when the partners leave, the initiatives will not crumble. If you impose and you leave, what you impose crumbles. But if you build ownership, it stays when you leave. This is one element of that partnership. The second is financing. Financing for peace and security. If we don't finance peace and security, we will certainly be burdened, all of us. And as the Honorable Minister has said, the immigration we are all talking about is an outcome of this insecurity. And we have to also remember that immigration is mainly internal within Africa. About 90% of African migrants move within Africa. 90%. And within poor communities. So when we are talking about immigration outside Africa, we have to look at the broader context. It is a phenomenon, but only a trickle is coming out of Africa. The rest stays within Africa. And of course, when they stay there, that causes additional burden to the host community, which is already fragile. So partnership to finance peace and security is in our collective interest. And this is why we at ECOWAS and the African Union in general welcome the new development at the United Nations, where the UN Security Council, after so many years of hard struggle, has agreed to be financing African-led peace support operations from the UN resources, from the assessed contribution. This creates predictability, it creates all the good things you can imagine. So we welcome this, and I think this is the type of partnership we need to be promoting to provide security for our region. Partnership in, of course, climate justice, as the Honorable Minister has indicated, and colleagues here, is essential. So I think this is what I want to add to what has been said. We need partnership across. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Now I want to turn to our audience. If anyone has a question, please raise your hands. And yes, please. I think our colleague will bring you a microphone.
Thank you. I'm Amanda Paul from the European Policy Centre, a think tank in Brussels. My question is about Black Sea security. Following the collapse of the grain deal, Russia pulled out of it, Ukraine established a new corridor. Despite many difficulties, we know that the Russians tried to bomb the hell out of all of Ukraine's grain infrastructure, ports and whatnot. But they succeeded and are now exporting the same amount of grain as they were during the initiative, more or less through the Black Sea and the solidarity corridors, including to some of the countries that have been mentioned here today, for example, Nigeria. My question is, how can Black Sea security be further strengthened to allow more grain to be exported? Because the situation in the sea remains quite perilous. For example, we know that Russia put tens of thousands of land or sea mines, whatever you want to call them, into the sea. Further initiatives to remove these, to enlarge the actual corridor. I'm linked to that because the World Food Programme has been a key partner of Ukraine in terms of its exports to many countries in the global south and Africa. Where is the possibility for further enlarging this cooperation?
And who's your question directed to?
I think probably to Mihai, coming from the Black Sea region, and maybe to Carl as well, because he's from the UN.
Well, in order to have the grain export corridors available, it's inextricably linked to the end of hostilities in Ukraine, and for Ukraine to be able to reclaim its territory and to be able to not only its territory but also its sovereignty and its independence. But one thing that escaped international media lately, which is focusing on the front line on the land, it is the fact that on the sea, Ukraine was actually very successful in enlarging, in clearing those landmines and creating room for that export corridor, despite many challenges. Actually today, there were the Russian rocket attacks in Odessa, which is the biggest port in Ukraine. But in the recent time, in fact, Ukraine managed to have big improvements in its terms of controlling its territorial waters. We, from our side, provided our ports that we have on the Danube and the infrastructure that we have, the land infrastructure that goes to Romania and then elsewhere. And we'll continue to do so. But ultimately, the security of the exports of Ukrainian grain is predicated on the Ukraine's capacity to withstand this horrendous aggression that the Russian government is waging against it. And it's up to the international community to make sure that Ukraine is able to withstand this pressure and reclaim its territory and be that provider of security, including food security, to the countries that need it. So it's the international community that has to continue to show solidarity in order to maintain Ukraine's territorial integrity and provide the support to the countries that need the grain from the breadbasket of the world that Ukraine is. Thank you.
You know, Ukraine, before the war, was our largest single resource for procurement. I think 50% or so came of our wheat from Ukraine. Partly because of quality, price, but also proximity to many of the big operations we have on the Horn of Africa or in the Middle East. So it was a major blow for us, of course, when this was disrupted, and that's why we were so grateful to Turkey and the Secretary Generals and others to found that formula for the Black Sea Initiative. We were the first vessel into Odessa under that agreement to also show others that it was working, and we exported quite massively, I think some 30 vessels in that period. Of course, that's now come to a stop with the suspension. And the new formula is so far not solid enough to meet international insurance and shipping standards. And so while we have continued, it's at a cost that is not competitive on the international market. And that is a challenge for us as humanitarians, because the resources we have, as I discussed before, we need to be able to help as many people as possible. And hence, if it's cheaper elsewhere, that's our principle, we have to go elsewhere. There has been targeted resources for the grain from Ukraine initiative, and so we have continued under that auspices, but it's yet not competitive enough or stable enough. And so the efforts that continue, not least from Turkey, to find a more formalized understanding are critical for us, but frankly for the Ukrainian farmers and economy foremost. We are extremely worried about the impact on Ukrainian farming, not least small and medium-sized farms. because of this, but also because of the mining situation that, or mine situation that you referred to. We are engaged with humanitarian assistance all along the front line, but also now increasingly in mine clearance, and so that Ukrainian farmers can come back on their land. There are, hundreds of thousands of hectares that are now closed off, and what needs to happen quickly is what we call a survey and release, where we quickly survey what is actually contaminated in that land that has been closed off, to demark that quickly, and so that farmers can come back on all the other pieces of land that are not polluted. That's something we are actively engaged on in Ukraine with the Ukrainian government and local authorities as a top priority. And these two goes together, to get farmers back on their land, but also make sure that their products are competitive through the Black Sea.
Thank you so much for that. I think our time is almost up now. I think today, especially with the shocking figures provided here, I think we've seen once again how vital it is, with the global population exceeding almost 8 billion now, and in shade of today's multi-dimensional crisis, innovative and combined efforts to create sustainable agri-food systems is vital and inevitable. And one, perhaps, note to keep in mind from the session would be, how many times have we stressed that this is a 360 ecosystem, and the dynamics are inescapably interlinked. So as I said before, no one is safe before everyone is safe. Thank you so much for sparing your time with us today. It was an honor moderating this session. Thank you so much.